Hello, and welcome back to part 2 of our series on Turnitin assignments in Brightspace. This is Professor Valerie Pell from Wilbur Wright College, and I'll be your host for this training session. In this installment, we will be focusing particularly on the workflow for grading your assignments in Turnitin and the integration between Turnitin and the Brightspace gradebook. This training is really dependent upon faculty having taken part 1 of this training series. So if you haven't taken that part, this workflow may not work for you. Now let us begin. Training assumptions. For today's training, the Brightspace team is making some assumptions about trainees. First, we assume that you have completed the Brightspace Foundations training so that you already have some familiarity with navigating Brightspace. Second, we assume that you have completed part 1 of this training, creating Turnitin assignments in Brightspace. Third, we assume that you understand that Brightspace has many workflows. This presentation represents the best practice the team has found to grade Turnitin assignments after setting up the assignment as we outlined in part 1 of this training. The fourth assumption is that you want your Turnitin assignments to integrate with the Brightspace gradebook. Not all workflows allow Turnitin to efficiently talk to the Brightspace gradebook, so this assumption is extremely important. Finally, our fifth assumption is that you will return to part 3 of this presentation, which will cover how to troubleshoot Turnitin assignments. Part 2 Agenda. Here is our agenda for part 2 of the Turnitin assignments training session. In this session, you will learn to access assignments in Brightspace. 2. Learn best practices for accessing Turnitin from assignments. 3. Learn some basics about the Turnitin Feedback Studio. 4. Learn to assess multiple students in Turnitin. 5. Learn the final steps to the grading workflow for Turnitin assignments. 6. You will see how students can view their feedback. 7. We will also recap the main ideas from this presentation. And finally, 8. We'll look ahead to the next training session, Part 3, Troubleshooting Turnitin Assignments. Access assignments in Brightspace. Begin the workflow. While you can begin grading assignments from many different places in Brightspace, with this workflow, it's very important to go directly to the assignment itself. Therefore, the first step of this workflow is to return to the Assessments drop-down arrow. Once you have revealed the drop-down menu for Assessments, click Assignments. Brightspace Assignment Submission folder. Now we're in the Brightspace Assignment Submission folder. This is a very important step. Click on the name you've given to the assignment. Don't be tempted to access it differently. Be sure to click on the assignment name. This will bring you directly into the Submission folder. Submission folder attributes. Let's look at some of the attributes of the Submission folder. First, there are Submission folder options along the top. Here you can access options like edit the submission folder and email students who didn't submit the assignment. Next, there are different submission views for the folder, view by user or view by submission. For our purposes, we'll leave it on the default, which is view by users. The next area is very useful. This is the action button area. 2 important action buttons we'll use later are mark as read and publish feedback. Then there are several columns of information. Let's look at those columns more closely. Submission folder column attributes. The first column is the student selector. Here you can select multiple students to complete the same action, like email, mark as read, or publish feedback. You can click into the boxes next to the student's name to select those students. The next column provides students' names. You can sort submissions by last name in this column. Notice that the names are listed in blue and have a slightly grayed out band going horizontally across the submission folder. The third column is for the TurnItIn Similarity Report snapshot. You'll find the words similarity and originality are often used interchangeably in the TurnItIn world. Both refer to how original or similar the student writing is compared to other sources and writing in the TurnItIn database. The fourth column is for TurnItIn GradeMark. GradeMark is the TurnItIn product that refers to the scores and the feedback that's given by instructors to students in the TurnItIn system. Submission folder column attributes continued. The next column is for the submission date. This area will flag late papers. The final column is for deleting submissions. Simply click on the garbage can to delete a submission. While we're on this page, I also want to mention that the titles of submitted files show up below the student's name and next to the TurnItIn information. This is very important to note because we'll be using this submission name later. Also, at the bottom of the page, you'll see the per page view. The default is to show 20 students on one page, but you can change that with a drop-down arrow to 50 students. I recommend changing it to 50, so all students show up on one page when you're grading. Access TurnItIn from Brightspace Assignments. TurnItIn workflow. Start with the submission title. As I mentioned previously, there's many workflows to get to TurnItIn. There's not just one way to get there. However, not all workflows allow Brightspace and TurnItIn to talk to each other as efficiently as this workflow. Therefore, it's super important that you begin by clicking on the submission title of the file submitted by your student. Let me repeat. Begin by clicking on the submission title of the file submitted by your student. Trust me, this step will make your life easier because it will let Brightspace and TurnItIn talk to each other more efficiently. Brightspace Assignment Evaluation Tool. After we've clicked on the submission title of the file submitted by a student, we are now in Brightspace's Assignment Evaluation Tool. There are several areas you should notice about this tool. First, the submission title and the name of the student. Next, you'll see the submission text. This may take a moment to load in your browser. If so, don't fret. You'll be reading the text in TurnItIn, so it doesn't matter if it loads slowly here. You'll be able to move forward without it being fully loaded. On the far right, you'll see Brightspace's evaluation options. This is an area for feedback, grades, etc. within Brightspace learning environment. It's not the same as TurnItIn. Another area that you'll notice is the student information. You can email a student, check progress metrics, and even chat with a student right from this little area. It's a pretty handy tool. There are also submission navigation areas for navigating among students within the Brightspace assignment grading tool. These have the headings Next Student or Previous Student, accompanied by arrows. Use Markup Document. So far in Part 2 of the TurnItIn training, we've only been in Brightspace. We're now about to leave Brightspace and go to TurnItIn. Remember, this isn't the only way to get to TurnItIn, but it's the best way. To get to TurnItIn, we are going to click on Markup Document. Clicking on Markup Document will open TurnItIn in another browser tab, and you will go about grading in TurnItIn much as you have in the past. However, the Markup Document option doesn't show up in all workflows, so it's really important that you use this workflow to get there. So make sure you click Markup Document from this Brightspace assignment evaluation page. Then TurnItIn will open in another browser tab. TurnItIn's Feedback Studio. Navigating TurnItIn's Feedback Studio. As you may have noticed, TurnItIn has opened in a new browser tab. We are now in TurnItIn's Feedback Studio. The Feedback Studio is where you can give feedback to your students on their papers. This part of TurnItIn should feel very familiar for those of you who have used TurnItIn before. I'm not going to cover all the functionality in TurnItIn, but I will review some of the main aspects of the Feedback Studio. For more in-depth information about using specific tools of TurnItIn, you may need to look up TurnItIn on YouTube or attend future training sessions. Nevertheless, I do want to show you some of the basics about navigating in the Feedback Studio. First, notice the student's name and submission title have loaded in the Feedback Studio. Next, you'll notice that the student's paper has loaded into the TurnItIn Feedback Studio. Then, to the right of the paper, you will find the Feedback Studio's tools for giving feedback. We also have an area to add points and navigate among students. TurnItIn's Feedback Studio Quick Marks. The first topic I want to talk about in the Feedback Studio are quick marks. You can find quick marks with the checkmark icon. Essentially, quick marks are comments that you give to multiple students. You can make your own quick marks, or TurnItIn has some that are standard. There are different sets of quick marks. This area tells you which quick mark set is in use. You can create sets that are specific to an assignment or that are for general use. The options are really endless. To change the set that's in use, utilize the gear next to the heading. There's also a search function in case you've forgotten how you've labeled a quick mark or don't feel like scrolling down. Finally, this is the quick mark palette. You can drag and drop quick marks from the palette on the right to the student's paper. You can also highlight text in the student's paper and then add a quick mark. Feedback Studio Feedback Summary. When you want to give general feedback, click on the pencil icon. Doing so will load the Feedback Summary tool. In the Feedback Summary tool, you can add voice comments. You can record up to 3 minutes of voice feedback for your students. You can also add text comments. Text comments are general or overall comments or feedback that relate to the submission in its entirety. Feedback Studio TurnItIn Rubrics. The icon in TurnItIn for rubrics is the stepping squares. When you click on that icon, rubric information will load. The rubric information is located at the top. This area tells you what rubric, if any, is in use in TurnItIn. Remember, TurnItIn's rubrics are different from Brightspace's rubrics. They're not connected. Then, you'll see a panel with a rubric score selector. Move the blue circles to assess student work. Finally, once you've scored the paper, click Apply to Grade. This will allow the score from the rubric to filter into the grade for the assignment. Feedback Studio's Originality. Up next is the TurnItIn Originality Report. This little panel allows you to view and filter the matches of your student's paper to other writing in TurnItIn's database. Feedback Studio's ETS tool. ETS is TurnItIn's grammar, conventions, usage, and spelling tool. You can use it to flag errors in student papers. The ETS icon is purple. When you click on it, the ETS feedback will generate throughout the student's paper. One feature of ETS is that it gives you statistics about the kinds of errors it has flagged in students' papers. Like the icon itself, ETS feedback is purple when it generates within the paper. Feedback Studio's download function. To download a student's paper from TurnItIn, find the download icon, which is represented with a downward-facing arrow. When you click on the download icon, a window will pop up with 3 different options. The first option says Download Current View. If you download the current view, what you will download will be a PDF that contains all the TurnItIn features and feedback, such as the originality report, quick marks, ETS feedback, and text comments. This is generally the download option faculty will use because it contains the robust feedback given in TurnItIn. The next option is to download the digital receipt. This option is rarely used because it doesn't download the paper. The last option is to download the original file type. This will download the paper as it was submitted by the student without any instructor feedback. Assessing multiple students. Finishing the first paper. I have finished assessing my first student, Orville. As you can see, I provided Orville with quite a bit of inline feedback through quick marks, ETS, and comment bubbles. I've also provided Orville with general comments in the text comment box. Add a score and move on. Now it's time to add a score for Orville, my first student. Once I've done that, I'm ready to move on to the next student. I'll use the arrows to navigate to the next student in my grading queue and continue grading that way. Finishing TurnItIn. I've now finished grading Wilbur's paper, so I've finished grading all submitted papers for this grading session. Now I'll return to the browser tabs. Then I will click and close the TurnItIn browser tab by clicking the X. I'll then return to the Assignment tab in Brightspace. Final grading steps. Finishing in Brightspace. We are now back in Brightspace's Assignment Evaluation tool. You'll notice that we have returned to where we began with my first student, Orville. That's okay. As we progress from one student paper to the next in TurnItIn, Brightspace stays on the same student. But if we've done the workflow correctly, Brightspace essentially has been listening to what we've been doing in TurnItIn. We can tell this here because Orville's score has filtered from TurnItIn back to Brightspace. What I need to do now is return to the submission folder, so I will click on Back to Submissions. Back in the submission folder. We're now back in Brightspace's submission folder. You may notice that the score from TurnItIn filtered back over here into Brightspace. Again, that's a good sign that the two systems are talking to each other. You will also see some changes in status. Orville's status says Draft Saved, whereas Wilbur's says nothing. That's okay. The reason for this is that we only went into Orville's assignment evaluation page in Brightspace, but we didn't visit that page for Wilbur. Wilbur's status will be corrected in the following steps. Mark as read. The next step is to select the students that I assessed in TurnItIn. I select them by clicking in the checkboxes next to their names. Then, I will mark their submissions as read. If I skip this step, the gradebook will show that I've not assessed any of these papers, so it's important to mark them as read. Publish feedback. Now I need to publish feedback so students can see it. I'll keep my students selected from when I mark them as read. Then I'll click Publish Feedback. When I click Publish Feedback, a pop-up window will appear asking me if I really want to publish this feedback. I'll click Yes, I do indeed want to publish this feedback. Check the gradebook. Now that we've published the grades, you'll notice that the status has changed for each student. Now we need to make sure that the grades have filtered all the way over to the gradebook. So we'll return to the Assessments drop-down window and select Grades. In the gradebook, I'm now in the Brightspace gradebook. Notice that I'm viewing this information from the Enter Grades tab at the top. When I scroll over, you can see that the scores of the 2 students I assessed in TurnItIn have filtered over to the gradebook. You may also notice that the assignment icon doesn't have a red circle, so they are marked as being read. Now, as you look at this, you might be wondering about Maureen. Well, Maureen didn't submit this assignment, so I could now go in and add a 0 here in the gradebook, but I'll skip that step for now. Student View. Student View. Students can get their feedback in 2 different ways. First, they can view it from their grades page by clicking on View Inline Feedback. They also can view it by going directly to the assignment they submitted and clicking View Assignment. In either case, the Feedback Studio will open for them and they will be able to view your feedback just as you left it for them in the Feedback Studio. They can also download their feedback as well. Check who has viewed feedback. It's easy to check who's viewed feedback. Return to the assignment by going to the Assessments drop-down and clicking on Assignments. Then, look back at the status of the paper. You will see if a student has viewed feedback. The status will tell you when the feedback was read. If the student has not read feedback, it will say nothing. In this case, Orville read his feedback on October 14th at 10:10 a.m. But Wilbur has not read his feedback because it doesn't say feedback has read and have a date. Grading TurnItIn Assignments Recap. Let's recap what we covered today. First, start with the Assessments drop-down menu. Second, select Assignments. Third, click on the assignment name. Fourth, click the submission title. This is important. Remember, always click the submission title so you can get to the next step. Recap continued. Step 5. Click Markup Document from the Brightspace Assignment Evaluation tool. Remember, you must click Markup Document for TurnItIn and Brightspace to talk to each other effectively. Step 6. Grade your submissions in TurnItIn as you always have in the past. Step 7. Close the TurnItIn browser tab when you're done grading all of your assignments in TurnItIn. Step 8. Back in the Brightspace's Assignment Evaluation tool, choose Back to Submissions. Step 9. Mark your submissions as read. Step 10. Publish your submissions. Step 11. Check the gradebook just to be sure that TurnItIn and Brightspace have talked to each other effectively. We have now finished the second part of this training. Please make sure to check out the third part, which will cover how to troubleshoot common TurnItIn issues. Thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions about this presentation or Brightspace in general, please contact your local faculty champion, your technology integration specialist, or the CCC Help Desk. This is Professor Valerie Pell signing off. I hope you have another bright day grading TurnItIn assignments in Brightspace.